Hello, welcome to this very special edition of the Pace Report. I'm Brian Pace. Gil Scott-Heron and Brian Jackson in the 1970s took music to a very different level, both socially and musically. Now, the two met while attending Lincoln University, and they met as kindred spirits. In fact, both of their heroes were Oscar Brown Jr. as well as Langston Hughes. Now, Gil Scott-Heron was a very prolific poet as well as novelist, penning two books, The Nigger Factory as well as The Vulture. Now, what made these two very unique is that Brian took Gil's lyrics and poems and fused them with music, American roots music by way of jazz, blues, rock, and funk, and formed a band called the Midnight Band. Now, these two would write and pen some very prolific and socially conscious songs like Johannesburg, Angel Dust, It's Your World, and The Revolution Will Not Be Televised. Tonight here on the Pace Report, we're going to spotlight and reflect on the legacy of Brian Jackson. As you know, Gil has passed away more than a decade ago, but Brian is doing a very, very courageous project in which he's touring the country and also overseas. And the program is called Spider and Stick, American Groits. Those were the nicknames of Gil and Brian. Now, what's very interesting about this show is that, one, he does do a monthly residency at New Blue here in New York City, which you should check out, as well as in this show, he sits down with his fans intimately with his trio, and he dissects and breaks down the concept of how he and Gil created some of their prolific songs. Tonight here on the Pace Report, you're going to see highlights of his residency here at New Blue, and we're also going to see an ended and candid interview with me and Brian as we discuss his partnership with Gil, how they wrote the songs and how they recorded some of their iconic records, as well as reflect on the legacy of Brian Jackson. So sit back, relax, and enjoy highlights of Mr. Brian Jackson and his monthly residency at New Blue performing Sticks and Spider American Groits here on the Pace Report here in New York City.
Sunshine.
Spider and Stick, American Griots. This is really something that's long overdue, especially coming from Brian Jackson, because this is going to be the very first time the world gets to see and interpret how the world saw you and Gil.
Well, that's true. I mean, there's two people who can tell this story. Um, One of them was a little bit tight-lipped about it, um, and the other one is the one who's left, and that happens to be me. A lot of people want to know things about how we did those songs, or what the conditions were, what the circumstances. I mean, most of the people that we play to now weren't alive um, when we were children, and to understand some of the pressures that we were feeling as young black children and young black boys in America. Um, is something that I would like to give context to. I would like to be able to explain that a little bit more, because the fight it hasn't really changed that much. Um, and these are some of the things that, as parents, we need to remember, that we need to think about. Um, and I'm a parent now. I have 5 kids, now in total. I always tell people I think I've done my part for humanity. If we become extinct as a species, don't look at me. It wasn't my fault. I did what I did my bit. But as parents and as educators uh, and as inhabitants of the earth, there are some things that we all kind of need to understand about our commonality. And this is some of the things that I still hope, that we always hope that we did in our music, and that I still hope to accomplish.
You know how relevant you are right now. I'm going to tell you how relevant and how important you are right now. 2 weeks ago, I had the honor of going and attending the Brooklyn Hip Hop Festival. And this year's headliners was Black Star, Talib
Oh
Kweli,
yeah.
and Yaslin Bey,
Hmm.
Mos Def.
Yes.
And in the middle of the show, guess what they performed?
Brown Skin Lady.
They did that. They definitely did that. That's my song.
Yeah.
They stopped in the middle of the show
Revolution.
and they did We Almost Lost
Oh
Detroit.
wow. Okay.
And they
I
gave you
appreciate it.
and they gave you a lot of props that when they recited, they did the last 2 verses of it.
Well, that's very interesting, because the song, that the original song Brown Skin Lady was was based upon a sample from We Almost Lost Detroit. Um, and so that's so well. That's nice to know. I mean, I know that they've always kind of given props to Gil and me, and even so far as going to Gil, and asking him to do some work on the soundtrack for Hurricane, um, as well as Yasin, like reaching out to Gil um, in Gil's later years, and then asking him to perform with him. So um, yeah, I mean, no, I appreciate that. That's good to know.
You know, it's kind of full circle because I was a junior in college, University of Memphis, and the couple albums you did got me through it, and that Black Star record got me through those last 2 years, especially Brown Skin Lady and the Knowledge and Self. Those are the best tracks on that whole record. I'm listening to records now that you guys have done. Like the last record you did, 1980, Aliens. And it's really kind of prophetic because we're in a time where Trump wants to deport all the illegals out of this country. And I'm looking at you now, 2018. The stuff that you guys wrote, did you guys ever in a million years think that it would have even more of an impact now than it did when you did it 40 years ago?
We didn't even think it was going to have an impact then. Um, all that we felt that we could do is just kind of point out some of the rough spots of America. Some of the nagging inconsistencies, in America, and between the inconsistencies in America between the things that they say they're about, and how they actually practice or don't practice those same ideologies. Um, and it was kind of a warning. Also, there were some warning signs in there. Like for instance, we almost lost Detroit,
Yeah.
or shut them down, um, or even 1980 for that matter, um, which was kind of based around our fear that the world, the dystopian world of 1984, outlined by George Orwell, wouldn't come to pass. But unfortunately, we saw that too many of those elements were already in play, um, and that if we didn't shut them down, we would fall victim to a lot of those things, such as censorship, um, the Big Brother idea where you're being constantly being surveilled, some way. The revisionist history has really kicked in hard, man, over the last couple of years. Um, and the fact is that even if it's just one kind of group of people or based around one individual who is practicing this revisionist history, it's working. And that's the thing that I could never in my mind picture, that people could get their memories so short that that they could accept uh, an alternate uh, um, an alternate telling or an alternate recounting of something that just happened like 30, 40, 50 years, in their own lifetimes. That they would accept somebody telling them that no, this is not the way it happened, this is the way it happened. When you know it happened like that, when you know exactly how it happened.
I'm looking. I'm like you're saying. I'm 46, just turned 46, and I'm seeing a country that has reverted into 1950.
Hmm.
I'm seeing a country that's reverted back to 1865. And music of your generation in the 70s marked a very important fact. And it wasn't just R&B and soul. It was jazz. It was also rock and roll.
Hmm.
It seemed like the artists really were in tune to what was going on, and the fans were very receptive to the lyrics.
Yeah, there was a feeling. I think there was a quest, kind of in our generation, in my generation. I think there was a quest for another explanation, for another way of life, um, for answers, for peace, for justice. These are all things that we felt were achievable. Um, but when we ran into roadblocks, many of us kind of just folded up the tent, and went back to business as usual. So that's why in my show on Saturday, when I before I started to sing the song "Save the Children," I kind of included an apology from our generation, because there were so many of us that have not kept up the work, and our children are the ones who are not reaping the benefits of it. They're reaping the detriments of it, of our inaction.
If you drive through the country on a lazy afternoon, or you're watching the children playing after school, right now they seem to be so unaware
This is 1974. I'm gonna paint a picture for you. These were the top-selling soul records
Hmm.
according to Billboard in 1974. That nigga's crazy. Richard Pryor.
Number one.
Number one.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I wouldn't argue with that at all.
Fulfilling This, first finale, Stevie
Wouldn't argue,
Wonder.
wouldn't argue with that.
The Payback, James Brown.
Mm, mm-mm.
Open Our Eyes, Earth, Wind, and Fire.
Yes, sir.
Mighty Love, The Spinners.
Hmm.
Ship Ahoy, Ship Ahoy, the OJs.
Chip Ahoy, the OJs.
Live It Up, the Isley Brothers.
Yes, indeed.
Skin Tight, the Ohio
All
Players.
the names that should be there.
Can't Get Enough, Barry White.
Hmm.
Love Is the Message, MFSB.
All right, all right.
Imagination, Gladys Knight and the Pips.
Yes.
Body Heat, Quincy Jones.
Classics. All
Live, Marvin Gaye. Live, War.
duh. You know.
Now, segue Gil Scott-Heron and Brian Jackson in a gym called Winter in America
Mm.
on a tiny independent jazz label called Strata East.
Strata East.
Now, America is dancing to some very important message music in these albums I just named you.
Absolutely.
And you guys are doing something very, very against the grain. Your whole album is complete message, but it's very thought-provoking.
Well, I mean, the thing is that we just didn't have the the ability or the facilities to do those kinds of songs, to do those kinds of albums. And even though we were those all of the albums that you mentioned, we were heavily influenced by. We listened to all the time. Wished we could do stuff like it, but we weren't. It just wasn't within our scope. So what we did was whatever we could, and we we just tried to make the message and the content uh, to fill in the spaces.
I mean, the bottle. I mean, even in 2018, you go to any club here in New York City, people are getting on that dance floor, cutting the rug to
Crazy.
a very important record.
Crazy, crazy. I mean, I have to say that sometimes it's an oxymoron, in a way for people to be getting up and like partying so hard to that song when you really think about what the song is about, you know. But I understand it. Yes, it is. And how you doing? Yeah, um, I understand it. I understand that sometimes groove is more important, than anything else. But here's the thing: why I don't mind that is very simple because it was intended to be that way. Um, it was intended to be funky enough to make people dance because when people dance, um, their minds are open. They're, they get put into a frame of mind that makes them receptive to the messages that you're trying to put in, to the subliminal or subconscious messages that you're trying to put forth. Um, and when I was a young man, I used to read about some of the techniques that Madison Avenue was doing um, in making commercials and making advertisements. Like we would sit and we would look at McDonald's commercials and Kentucky Fried Chicken commercials and all this, and the first thing that we began to notice was that these huge corporations were using the music of the people, using the music of the streets to sell their products. And after having read some of the books that I was reading, such as Subliminal Seduction, uh, which was one of them, The Hidden Persuaders was another one. One of those was written by a man named Vance Packard. I'm not sure which one. But anyway, the books were about the techniques that Madison Avenue would use to get into your mind, like kind of on a psychoanalytical level, to make you feel that you needed something that you didn't need, to make you feel that if you had this product, that you would be a more complete human being. You know? And so we thought to ourselves two things. Number one, we need to talk about that. That was the revolution will not be televised. Okay. And then the other thing was we need to use that. So we started thinking, hey, you know what? What if you had a McDonald's commercial that wasn't talking about burgers, but was like talking about taking over something, or um, or making you aware of something that was going on in this country that needed to be addressed. It needed to be looked at. It needed to be protested, like uh, nuclear power plants, for instance. Um, so,
And it's funny you say that because what was that? The big nuclear crisis that happened in was it 9 Mile Island? I mean, it's
9 Mile
just
Island.
yeah. I mean, you guys were really hitting a lot of the issues right on the head, especially in the time under time.
We were there. I mean, it was going to affect us. It was going to affect our as of yet unborn children. And there are only a few ways I think that one has ever been able to address um, a large number of people. And one is to get up on a pulpit, and or a soapbox, or in front of large crowds of people, and say the truth and speak your truth. All those people got killed. So I mean, we were just as willing to lay down our lives as the next person, but we just didn't feel that it was necessary, or maybe as effective in the long term, as something that you will listen to over and over again.
One of the most prolific records that you wrote, Gil didn't write. One of my, and actually, this song now is even more relevant than when you guys recorded it back in '76. It's Your World.
Yeah, um, yeah, that's interesting. It's Your World has gone through a whole life of its own. It's kind of matured. It's been a late bloomer, kind of like I was. Um, but there again, it's a song that can be seen on so many different levels and can apply to so many different situations.
What
Um,
inspired you to write it?
I guess the what inspired me to write it was it was half a message to myself to remind me that against adversity to be myself, and to speak my own truth. And it was also a message to people who maybe hadn't gotten there yet, because a lot of people have begun to speak their truths um, I would say, over the last 50 years. A lot of secrets that people used to keep, they don't keep anymore. They talk about them openly, and they've experienced all kinds of negative responses and cruelty because of those things. And I feel like this was a song that basically said that you don't owe anybody anything for the ground that you're standing on. You don't owe them that. You were given that.
you up for this? So, it's fairly simple. I play a line, and then you just sing the line back to me. Easy peasy, right? I mean, look at your face. Will I lie to you? Okay, so here we go. Yeah, I mean, this is New York. You can't handle that. All right, let's try this. That was nice. Okay, wait, here we go. No.
I watched you play the flute, and I'm sitting here in Brooklyn. This is your home. This is home.
Yes, sir.
And jazz was really the dominant factor in your home.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm hearing Hubert Laws. I'm hearing James Moody. I'm hearing Herbie Mann, Roland Kirk. I'm hearing a lot of that. And then on the keyboard side, I'm hearing a lot of Herbie. I'm hearing a lot of Sly Stone. There's a lot of Sly. He was very proficient in
Yes, people don't really know that, but
he was good in that. And then also, I'm also hearing a lot of Joe Zawinul. I'm hearing a lot of the musical influences of your generation. Tell me about the guys that really kind of burned a spark for you when you started playing music.
that's crazy that you mentioned all of those people, because just about to a man, every one of those people that you mentioned, I have seen live. Is that a testament to the power of live music, or is it a testament to the fact that I went to see the people who I was most moved by? When you mention people like like Hubert Laws, or Herbie Mann, Yusef Lateef.
I forgot him.
Yeah, I know you did. But you meant to put him in there.
And see, we could talk about this because Hubert and Chick brought classical to the fold of jazz. Yusuf brought world music to the fold of jazz, and he connected it.
There it is.
He connected it. He made you go back and listen to African and certain Middle Eastern musics. Joe Zawinul is kind of weird because if you close your eyes, you thought he was black.
Oh yeah. I mean,
But you know what? He married the first. He married the first black Playboy bunny. He actually married. Yeah, he married. Yes.
Well, look, man. I mean, dude, we talking about a dude who wrote "Mercy, Mercy, Mercy." All right. Now, I don't care where you come from, or where you live. If you write "Mercy, Mercy, Mercy," something in you's black. Somewhere in you is black. People, you just don't write a song like that without some soul. So as far as I'm concerned, I can't attest to his, to his lineage or whatever, but he got some.
Austria,
he had
he's
some.
Austrian.
I know
Yeah,
what I'm saying.
Yeah, he's from Austria. And you know what's funny? I grew up. My grandfather was all things Nat Cole, Count Basie, Ellington. And there was a lot of Cannonball Adderley. In fact, he had about 2 copies of that live at the one with
What, the one
High
at the White
Fly.
House? Okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's funny because we talk about Joe Zawinul.
Yeah.
I think the reason why Cannonball was so successful was because of him and Bobby Timmons,
Yeah.
because they brought some
They
very
brought.
creative.
That's right. No, I mean they brought the blues to an otherwise extremely cerebral type of package. You know, Cannonball was soulful as hell, man. I mean, we were talking about Art Tatum before, who is also soulful as hell. You know, but when you combine that soulfulness with the technical mastery that both of those men had, um, you know, you come up with something that is compelling to the point of being for like for the next generations, and I don't know how many more generations, a study in how the form is played.
I saw Joe Zawinul right before he died, the Detroit Jazz Festival, and I left drained. You're laughing.
Yeah, I'm laughing.
And let me tell you why I left drained. As much as I love Joe,
Yeah,
he brought a lot of world music components to it, but his band was just.
yeah.
I went back to the hotel room and had to sleep.
You know, people used to say that about our shows too, and so I guess you can imagine what it was like when we had a lineup where Earth, Wind and Fire had invited us to open for their opening band, which was Weather Report. So I mean, you want to talk about drained? I had to listen to Weather Report. I mean, I had to listen to, yeah, I had to open up for Joe Zawinul and Wayne Shorter.
Jaco Pastori.
It wasn't Jocko yet. It was Alfonso. Just as bad, you know, just as bad, man. And then have Earth, Wind and Fire hit the stage, right? And then try to go to sleep and try to get up the next morning or the next afternoon or whenever I could get up and do it again. I mean, yeah, that was those were times that are not easily forgettable. And I think it was probably during that period that my respect for Joe Zawinul even grew more. Um, his arrangements and just watching him master with his mastery of the synthesizers, of the array of synthesizers that he had um, with him, that he would carry with him, was it was something that inspired me um, to try and do it myself, along with Stevie. Yeah.
How did you and Gil, well, how were you introduced to Malcolm Cecil? And how were you introduced to the Tonto? Because Malcolm's very important because of two things. He engineered and he recorded your last two records, three,
Hmm.
and he was one of the quintessential cats behind the mastermind of Stevie and his whole '70s era.
Yes, he and Robert Margouleff,
Yeah.
his partner, they built this phenomenal room full of synthesizers. You got to remember that during this time, synthesizers were very experimental pieces of and expensive pieces of equipment, um, and most of them only played one note. So, and they only were able to create one sound at a time. Um, but there were many different makers of synthesizers. Um, there was Buchla, there was ARP, there was Moog. Um, I, I believe even Oberheim was involved in it at the time. But what I know is that none of those synthesizers. There was ARP. I mentioned ARP. Um, so none of these synthesizers were exactly the same. None of them used exactly the same interfaces or connectors. So in order to make them all talk to each other was quite an engineering feat. Um, Malcolm and Robert figured it all out, built this container for it, like a kind of like a bookshelf of modules that went around like an average size, like your average size bedroom, and created a studio around it. We're basically looking at a room full of synthesizers that you can control from one keyboard. Yeah.
Now, if memory serves me correct, I did a little bit of research on this. It was you, Stevie, Billy Preston, and Chris Jasper. And I want to say Keith Emerson were the first cats that were starting to use this keyboard.
I heard that Zawinul actually had been
Yes, he
involved in
did.
that.
Yes, he did.
Yeah,
He did. He
yeah.
did.
I'm not sure about Keith Emerson, but I wouldn't be surprised. It was something that every keyboardist's dream to be. I mean, I had myself a little Moog Mini that we used to carry around, and I used to do. I started using it on the
Was it
from
Secret Trick?
South Africa to South Carolina.
That's when you started using
That's
it?
when I started using it. On Johannesburg, I used it, trying to kind of get like a warm guitar type of sound.
Yeah.
You know, so one of the other people I had been really strongly influenced by was like B.B. King, and his style of soloing over the blues. And I always wanted to try and recreate that. As a pianist and as a keyboardist, one of the biggest limitations, the most frustrating one, was the inability to bend a note like a guitar player could, or basically any other instrumentalist could. You know, who didn't play an instrument that had keys. So when the Moog synthesizer came out, the first thing I went to the store and asked them is like, can it bend a note? And when I looked at it and they showed me how you could bend a note, I was like, I got to get one of these. And so that was the beginning. That was the beginning of that, and kind of like the motivation for me to want to get more heavily, into it. But to go back to your question about how we met Malcolm Cecil and how we began working with him. We were kind of thrown at him. Clive Davis, who was the president of Arista Records at the time, was not happy with the direction that we had been on. He felt that I was way too jazzy, as a writer and a producer.
Wait a minute now. Stop. Now this is the same guy that had Anthony Braxton on your label.
Oh my God! Oh please. Well, yeah, but I think.
Now he's saying you too jazzy, and he signs Anthony Braxton.
I didn't say it made any sense, man. I'm just telling you what the man told me.
Now you know Anthony is out there.
Yeah, man.
He's still figuring it out.
Man, listen, he figured it out. If we still figuring it out. But yeah, I think he had big plans for Gil, based on the bottle, because the bottle could have sold way more units than it did. Basically hampered by the fact that it was on a small label that wasn't equipped for large distribution requirements. And Clive always felt like if I could get one more bottle, man, I could make this explode. And that's what he wanted from us. He wanted another bottle.
But It's Your World could have done that too.
It's Your World could have done that. It's Your World could have done that. But I wrote that, and he wasn't interested in anything I had to do. But, yeah, well, there was also Johannesburg.
Yes.
Johannesburg was, fit that description. The thing is that we did them when we felt them, not because not because we were afraid we wouldn't have a hit. Clive was a hit-oriented, and is still a hit-oriented record person, and there was no other theme. There was nothing else that was as important to him as having a hit. And he felt that we should have one of those on at least one of those on each album. And when he listened to a lot of our material, he didn't necessarily hear the hit. He didn't necessarily hear the popularity of it as we heard it. You know, I mean, we never thought that the songs we did could not be popular if they were presented in the right way and presented to the right audience. Um, but
How was what? Because it's funny because we got to go back to something that's very important about that Winter in America record. Stanley Cowell and Charles Tolliver, who founded Strata East Records, they were the ones that picked that record up and ran with it.
they did. It was Strata East was a label that was dedicated to being for making it possible for artists who were not tied in with huge resources, large amounts of money to record, etc. To make it possible for those artists to release a record and to not be beholden to the record company for the rest of the term of the contract to pay them back for for the monies that were advanced to them by the label. By contrast, Strata East required that you already have completed your album, and they would do the rest of it, like the packaging of it and the distribution of it, etc. While returning 85% of whatever profit the album made to the artist. Okay. The only problem with us was, and that they never expected, and rightfully so, they never expected to have a demand that was so far beyond their ability to meet. To the point that at pretty soon after Frankie Crocker played the bottle on WBLS in New York City, we were getting the calls from retailers telling us that they couldn't get it, and we made a call to Strata and asked them to ship us like about 10 or 20 boxes of the album. We were starting to send out the albums to the retailers whenever they would call. We gave them our number, and they would call us, and we'd send them out a box of. But even that wasn't enough.
Age
Home is Where the Hatred Is. There's a couple of gems that I really love. And that's one of my top 5. Tell me the first time you and Gil heard Esther Phillips' version of that song. And in the back of your head, because Esther had a very tumultuous life. She dealt with heroin, a really bad heroin addiction all her life. What was your take when you heard that version?
The thing about Home is Where the Hatred is that a lot of people don't understand that Gil was a writer who was so incredibly talented that he was able to tell the truth of someone whose experiences were so unlike his own. And what I'm talking about, I'm referring to 2 songs right now in particular. One is Your Daddy Loves You. Okay, now that song appeared on an album called, it appeared on Winter in America, and it was about a man who was having some problems with the mother of his daughter, and it looked like maybe he was going to have to break out at some point. And he came into his daughter's room, and she was sleeping, and he just like basically just poured his heart out to her, and told him that, how much he loved her. And everybody says, oh man, that's the sweetest song that anybody could ever write to their daughter. Except for one thing. Gil didn't have a daughter when he wrote that song. He wasn't even thinking about having a daughter. That didn't happen until maybe 8 or 9 years later. The other song that I'm referring to is Home is Where the Hatred Is. And Home is Where the Hatred is the same kind of thing. People say, wow, Gil is really, he's really opening up, man, and talking about his addiction. Gil wasn't an addict when he wrote that song. He was like, 19 years old when he wrote that. He was 19, we smoked a little weed and, drank some wine, but he was not, to my knowledge, he was not an addict of any kind at that particular moment. So the song was perhaps, I think it might have been suggested to her by her producer, Bob Thiel, who was our producer. And he thought it might be appropriate, I guess, under, for obvious reasons. And she didn't want to do the song. There was some way that either she was convinced to meet Gil at some point, or she actually heard the song. And then once she heard the song, I think is when I don't know if she actually met him first. I think she actually heard the song first. But the thing is that Esther saw this song as speaking to her and to her life and to her experiences. A song about someone who feels out of place wherever he goes, even with his family and the people that he loves, because of his addiction and the kind of shame, the inner shame, that he feels for being in that situation.
And the song, she brings it, she lived it. And I think that's Aretha Franklin, they were nominated in the same category, and Aretha gave her Grammy to her because that's heavy. That speaks volumes.
That sure does, man. Aretha is another soulful person who influenced us quite a bit, I have to say. You said you heard a little gospel, in my playing. It's probably because of Aretha. I would have to say that she influenced me in many ways, man. In terms of her emotional.
Can you imagine?
I can't.
Can you imagine your mentor, who her father dated off and on, and they had a very turbulent relationship from the stuff that I've been reading. Clara Ward. Clara Ward was kind of like a mother to her. And then you get all of these opportunities to thrive as not just a gospel singer, but as a jazz singer and a pop singer and a jazz vocalist and a soul vocalist. She's covered all gamuts of the whole musical spectrum.
That's true. That's true. And the thing that I think that we don't often talk about because it's such a part of our lives, you know. But especially people in my generation and your generation, um, we we never put boxes around our turntable. You know, I mean, anything you can find anything on my turntable because if I liked it, it was going on there. I liked it, I was going to listen to it. I didn't care what you called it. You know, I mean, now it's like you you go to Spotify, you know, you go to a genre, and then you listen to everything that's in that genre, and then whatever else is out there, you don't really care about because it's not really in your, you know, in your box. None of us, man, ever came up like that. None of us ever came up like that. I listened to soul, jazz, from the from the 30s, you know, in the 40s, Louis Armstrong, um, swing, bebop. I listened to funk. I listened to rock. I listened to blues, to R&B. It, I mean, there was something for you from every genre.
And radio used to be very supportive of the music and the artists.
And it used to be very diverse,
Yeah.
you know. And so before all of those labels, you could actually turn on a radio station and leave it because you were going to hear all the kinds of music that you liked. And that's something that we are really missing in this time. But you hear people like me play, and then you kind of get that um, in the mix because I've been influenced by all of those things, and the same with the music that Gil and I wrote. You know, we were influenced by all of those kinds of music, and they came out through our fingers and our vocal cords.
And we would before we started this interview, we talked about Aretha Franklin live at the Fillmore West, which is I have to go back to that record because what made that record great was the fact that King Curtis was her music director.
Oh boy.
And King Curtis recorded a live album from that same date also.
Yes. Yes. That's right.
Do you know who his band members were?
Well, let me see. There probably would have been Bernard Purdy, Chuck Rainey, or Jerry Jamott. Probably Chuck at some point. Um, I think that's it. I don't need
Billy
to know Billy Preston.
Billy Preston.
Billy Preston, and maybe James Ingram at some point. No, that was James Ingram was Ray Charles' organ player.
The Memphis Horn
The Memphis Horns.
on that record.
Yeah, that's right.
And it goes back to what you were talking about, you and the band. You guys were really a reincarnation of what those mega stars, those soul artists were doing. Wilson Pickett had a dynamic band. James Brown had a hellified band, Parliament Funkadelic. These guys were in the era of musicians, and you and Gil, you guys brought that to the forefront on everything that you put out, and even in your live shows.
Well, we had a lot of ideas, and at first we did what we could. I mean, and basically what we could do was Winter in America. It was basically just me and Gil putting down our ideas. It was kind of a sketch pad or a musical sketch pad or a musical novel is what we had originally tried to do it as. Um, and we didn't expect it. Actually, when we did the other songs, like the songs that had drums and bass, we didn't actually expect to put those on there because we couldn't afford to pay anybody. But our friends, Danny Bowens from Lincoln University and Bob Adams on drums from Lincoln University also came in to help us complete it, because they believed in what we were doing. But as we were able to, we kind of went for the horns and and eventually even the background vocals, because this is the music that we grew up in. Those names that you mentioned, I mean, Kool and the Gang, the Ohio Players, my homeboys, they from Brooklyn, man.
Yeah.
They were from right around the corner. So many of those, man. Crown Heights Affair. The list is. Then we're not even gonna go down to D.C. and talk about Chuck and them.
Oh yeah.
So all around us were these kinds of things, man. So we were influenced by the big by the big sound. We just we did what we could when we could do it.
I have to ask you, we're in the trap era now. Trap is popular right now. And it seems like now there are no singing vocal groups. There are no there's nothing new that's being added to what we call music. And I have to ask you why we're at this point of this in this diaspora.
I think that maybe one of the causes for it is that we are overwhelmed by the presence of the media. The media tells us what to think, what to listen to, what to eat, what to do, where to go, when to go, and everything else in between. So where do we get a chance to actually listen to our own thoughts? So with music, it's kind of the same thing. We've been on a steady diet of the same, for so long that now it seems like the right thing. We used to say, back in the day, there were a lot of songs that would come out on the charts, and we would think, oh man, that song is not really so great. It doesn't have a chance. But they would pump it 4 times an hour, day in and day out. And many of those songs actually, I ended up saying, "Oh, that's my jam," you know. And how does that happen? It happens through repetition. Repetition is the greatest way to get to change people's opinion about anything. And so now we are continually bombarded with repeat performances, with repeats of the same licks and the same chord changes, and the same rhythms and the same tempos, and the same arrangements, to the point where this is what is valid to us now.
Because I mean, with trap, and I don't want to put trap down because
I don't either.
the the original the origins of trap started with a crew from Atlanta called Organized Noise, and Organized Noise is very important in my generation because Outkast, in my opinion,
Okay.
set the pace for
Okay.
a very unique trend of where hip hop began in the mid '90s, and what I hear in trap is keyboard, the same beat, rhythm, same. It's just, and this is just my opinion, and I know that everyone is titled to an opinion, but it just seems like it's trapped. It's in this box. Hip hop never was like that when it came out in the '70s.
That's true. Well, you know, I think all forms of music are kind of a box, are kind of a trap. So I don't want to be too hard on them for that. This, I guess maybe the challenge of creativity is to be able to see what you can do different within that box. And I know that, like within the box of, say, for instance, bebop or post bop, or funk, or R&B or soul, or fusion, those are boxes, you know. But the challenge was not to be the same, was not to do it the same way. The challenge was to find out a way to do it differently.
Right.
And that seems to be, that particular challenge is the one that seems to be absent from, you know, from today's music. And I guess I'm going to have to put that on the urgency of new artists to be able to make a living. You know, it also has to do with the programming that a lot of young people are being given, that they have to be mega rich, super rich, you know, in order to be able to gain some type of self-esteem.
There have been over, I guess music is what? Modern music over the last 100 years. There has been some music that has faded out. Disco, well, we knew what happened in Wrigley Field in 1980. They blew up the records. Big bands ended because of the economics and traveling, and then also the writing.
That's right.
Writing for a big band is different.
Yeah.
Punk kind of shifted out. Do you think that jazz music and R&B, where it's at right now, do you think that certain parts of it has phased out?
Jazz now is kind of a scholastic subject, an academic subject, you know, for many people. It's all about the technique of jazz. I mean, there are schools that just talk about the techniques of jazz. They want to break down and then evaluate every little aspect of a jazz artist's performance, of a jazz artist's life, of a jazz artist's thinking. Everything is in a textbook somewhere, and you're going to have to regurgitate it in order to pass that class. And in that sense, I think jazz, elements of jazz have not survived. For instance, the spontaneity of jazz is somewhat lost on a lot of new musicians who are studying it. One of the biggest pieces of jazz that I feel has been underappreciated and kind of obscured, is the radicalism of jazz. You know, is the attitude, the defiance of jazz. I think that this is lost on people who didn't see it up close. And it's one of the things that I always like to talk about and impress upon young jazz artists. That jazz was originally a music of rebellion. Um,
Well, look at bebop. Look what they did in Minton's.
I was specifically talking about bebop. This was the first time where, like for instance, you look at at Dizzy Gillespie, for instance. Dizzy was loud, he was boisterous, he was always joking around, he was clearly having a good time. This was not an academic endeavor for him. This was a lifestyle and a choice.
Tito Puente was like that. I mean, I didn't want to cut you off. It's just I'm feeling you on that.
Yeah, I mean, and this is what I'm saying, that when we look at jazz now, it seems like such a sterilized version of something that happened a long time ago that really nobody can relate to. But if you were there at that particular time, it was a different story. It energized you. It made you feel like you wanted to get out and do something. It made you get out and made you feel like you wanted to march, or you wanted to go out to a rally, and find out what could be done, or you wanted to get together with a bunch of people and party and talk about things, and have discussions over coffees and in cafes, try to see what direction we were all going through as young people. That's gone. That's gone. And this is, for me, this is what black music is about. It's about unity. It's about unifying people. And this was the biggest reason and one of the biggest motivations for the music of Gil Scott-Heron and Brian Jackson. We wanted to carry on that tradition that I just talked about.
That's funny you say that. I just ran into Mark Carey a couple of days ago. In fact, we found out we live a half a block from each other. That's how New York is. And Mark is doing some tremendous things. He's been trying to get people back to that element that you're talking about. And he said one of the things that he wants to do is that he has to center it around alcohol. And I say that because when I was growing up listening to jazz, my grandparents played cards and dominoes all night. And my grandmother used to send me to get to the beer, go get the beer for their player. And you're laughing, but jazz,
because I know what you're talking about, man.
This is American roots music.
Yeah,
this music is rooted in beer, bud, scotch,
yes, sir,
cloves,
and dancing.
There it is.
And dancing and laughing and having a good time. Man, I used to be in my room, man, and my moms would and her friends would get over there, man. They would start putting on that Gene Ammons and that organ music, that Jimmy Smith.
Yeah, yeah.
You better watch out.
Yeah.
You better watch out, man, because that's what it was all about. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Teach your mind to travel past the limit of this place. The greatest truth around this way. There is no limited space. Questions there are many, answers but a few.
Richard Pryor.
Mm.
You guys got a lot of black people through the 70s. Paint the picture to my viewers. That beautiful day at Studio C, December 15th, 1975.
Well, we had been watching Saturday Night Live since it started, and we were just amazed that of some of the skits and some of the ideas that got through the censorship there.
Lorne Michaels.
Lorne Michaels. So it's like we were thinking this is a fantastic show. Never thinking that we actually would ever get a chance to play on there. And one day, we got a call from Saturday Night Live. They wanted us to perform on the show that Richard Pryor happened to be guest hosting. And I mean, if there is a heaven, I guess I was in it right then. There couldn't have been any better moment. Like Richard Pryor was one of the. Richard Pryor was a poet, in the same way that Gil Scott-Heron was a poet.
The jazz comedian.
Yes, the jazz comedian, man. I mean, like for instance, I'll give you a perfect example. If you're really familiar, those of you who are really familiar with Langston Hughes' work, not only was he an incredibly sensitive poet and writer, but he also was funny as hell. And he had a series called a series of books called that were done in the voice of one of his alter egos, Jesse B. Semple. I happened to find one of those books coming up, and it was a book called Simple's Uncle Sam. Okay, where this guy, Jesse B. Semple, living in Harlem, work a regular job, just an ordinary man, just an everyman living in Harlem, living his life. The wife, I'm not sure if he had a kid, he probably did, the whole nine. Go out on Saturdays, have himself a little drink, a little taste whenever. But the things that were coming out of his mouth, with Langston being behind it, were just the way he put those things was so funny. I mean, when you read this book, you kind of begin to understand the kind of humor that is possible when black people do comedy. So in my view, Richard Pryor was someone who continued that legacy of Jesse B. Semple, of Langston's Jesse B. Semple, with a vengeance. I mean, like the stories he used to tell, and people don't remember that he used to assume personalities at the flick of just like at the drop of a hat. He would turn into
Mudbone.
Say boy. Say boy. Right. Hey, I mean, he had them all, man. He had the junkie on the corner. He had the wino. He had the He was so many different. I can't even.
I bring that up because this is 1975. This is after Nixon. This is a time when heroin really was hit the black community hard.
Yeah.
Richard Pryor and Gil Scott-Heron, Brian Jackson, you guys lived the 70s, and I think Saturday Night Live also becoming an institution that it became, you guys touched a nerve that...
Well, hopefully.
No, not hopefully, you did. Because...
what we were trying to do. That was the goal. Some nerves needed to be touched because a lot of stuff was getting on our nerves. So we just kind of try to give it back a little bit. Yeah.
This is the difficult part of the interview. I never asked you this in the
Okay.
many years I've asked you.
All right.
What began the rift and the demise of the partnership between Brian Jackson and Gil Scott-Heron?
Nah, man, it would be too disingenuous for me to say I don't know, um, because we definitely had some differences of opinion. One of the, I guess, one of the biggest and the biggest rift and the earliest rift occurred uh, when I realized that the music was turning into something that it maybe Gil hadn't intended it to be. Gil called himself a bluesologist, um, and he was deeply attached to the blues, as am I. But by the same token, Gil was more of a person who appreciated a lot of different kinds of music, but not necessarily to experiment with them. Me, as a musician, um, I always wanted to not only to appreciate music that I liked, but I also wanted to experiment with it, to examine it, to break it down and into its elements, and see how I can incorporate them into my own language. Um, and I would say over the 7 or 8 years that Gil and I had been working together, and leading bands together, uh, those bands turned into just monster um, assemblages, man. That they were overwhelming. I mean, even for the musicians involved in it, including myself, it was kind of an awe-inspiring and overwhelming force. The drummers that we had 3 drummers in our band. Um, a brother who was given an honorary membership into the Senegalese dance troupe, Barnett Williams, who played djembe. When he played djembe, it was like a lightning bolt from the sky. You know, Tony Duncanson, God rest his soul. Also, they both passed away. A timbale player who also played the congas. Uh, he was also played the djembe. He was like one of the bedrocks of the music of the Midnight Band, as well as the Amnesia Express. Um, I mean, there was so many beautiful elements that came together, um, in our music, and it became very music heavy. I feel like in the end, I came to understand that it kind of lost the original balance that it had between music and poetry. And it's something that Gil made me aware of, that he felt uncomfortable about. And that kind of threw me off. It really kind of threw me off my game, because I felt like it was developing at the same, at the same level. Um,
Did drugs play a part of it too?
at that time, I didn't see anything like that. I did not see that. What I saw was somebody who kind of felt lost, what kind of looked like he was lost in where he had ended up. Um, and I knew for a fact that he was unhappy about that. But that at the same time, he felt driven to go on. And I suggested that we both kind of take a break, like maybe go on sabbatical, or just, we were working like over 200 days a year, um, kind of relentlessly, for years. And it just occurred to me, at one point, it occurred to me that we hadn't written a song together, um, and that we hadn't really had any time to decompress, and get back to just like hanging out, and writing some more songs. Um,
How did you detox from all of that? When the dust settled, you guys recorded the last record.
yeah.
How did Brian Jackson go into the 80s?
Oh, kicking and screaming.
I would kick and scream. Listen, anytime Ronald Reagan set foot in that White House, I would be kicking and screaming too.
Oh man, Yeah, man, I did not go quietly. I'll tell you that much.
Woo! The wool, you guys got the wool over your eyes. Everybody got the wool, especially the 80s was bad because, crack.
Yeah.
And then these stringent prison sentences. And
the 3 times you're out and all that stuff. Yeah.
The 80s was pretty rough.
The 80s were hard. There was a lot more drugs on the street. A lot more pitfalls, man. A lot more things that could trip you up pretty easy. And along with all of that, I was pretty much off the scene. Like to the music that I was interested in doing, the places that I was going to see if I could do them were not having it. Everybody was kind of like on the, it's got to be 120 beats per minute. And if not, then it's not really going to happen. So I just kept writing. And in any other business, you have an inventory. Your inventory goes down, you're not in business. So I just kept writing, and that's all I did. And I ended up maybe because of that writing, I ended up working with people like Will Downing. I worked on all of Will Downing's first album and some of his second. So we had a nice collaboration.
You and Ananje Allen Gooms worked with him on those first couple of records.
Yes, we did. Ananje, the mayor.
Yes, sir.
The mayor. Yeah, we did. We ended up working with him on that, and later on, I had written some tunes that ended up on Gwen Guthrie's last album, Hot Times. So I got a chance to work with that queen, and
gotta have a J.O.B.
Yes, indeed.
You wanna be with me?
Yes, indeed. for a few months there, she was my J.O.B. and I really enjoyed working with her. And I continued to write, and every once in a while, but then I started to realize, I think at some point, that I really like to play. I really like to play live, and I like to improvise. So it kind of goes full circle, because having come to that realization, I put a band together in like '99, and I started focusing. It's funny what happened, because when I did the album, I realized that some of the songs I was going to have to sing, and I wasn't no singer, man. I wasn't feeling any kind of way about being a singer, to be honest with you. But I had to do it. And now people will come up to me and they'll say, "Man, you singing, it's wow, it's really," and I always think back to how scared I was to even open my mouth at first. But I guess if you stick to something 20 years, maybe something will come out of it. Maybe you'll eventually learn how to do it. And I feel that, like I said, I'm a late bloomer, but I feel that all the elements have finally come together at this point where I feel I have a nice band, and I'm on the right direction. And that direction is what we were originally talking about, the thing that I call Spider and Stick, American Griot.
Because I've always told everybody, I've always put you in high esteem, because I said Brian Jackson to Gil Scott-Heron is what Paul Mooney was to Richard Pryor. Or Billy Strayhorn was to Duke Ellington. You really were the eyes, ears, and all music to Gil's prose.
Well, I'm speechless, man, at those comparisons. I suppose I feel that I was instrumental, no pun intended, to the sound of the legacy. That was my job. It was important to me, and I guess I didn't know at the time, but it seems that I did it right at some point, because when people sample our music, they're sampling that music. They're sampling the music itself, and so I'm happy to be a part of that. I'm happy to be a part of that legacy.
Something to offer you. Music to offer you. Coming to spirits to offer you. Seasons may change and feelings may change, but music remains. Seasons may change and feelings may change, but music remains. Something to offer you.
Brian Jackson, what does jazz music mean to you?
Jazz music means that somewhere in the world people are concerned about the tradition. That somewhere in the world, as long as somebody is playing it, somebody is getting the message from the ancestors, the message that they intended. And as long as I'm breathing, I'm about making sure that that continues.
That'll do it again for another edition of the Pace Report. I'd like to personally thank and congratulate the legendary Brian Jackson for one, sitting down with me breaking bread, as well as allowing me to shoot, as well as make sure that this interview was possible. Make sure you go out and support Brian for his monthly residency at New Blue for Spider and Stick American Groits. For more information, visit New Blue's website at newblue.net, as well as brianjackson.net. I'd like to personally thank the staff and management at New Blue for their warm hospitality. As always, please visit my website, www.thepacereport.com, for my weekly column, as well as my past segments. Until next time, remember, if it's in the groove, it'll make you move. Till next time, peace.